Amen. All right. So this morning, I'll be talking to us about a message that I entitled Gatekeepers. Gatekeepers. There's this story of a man that I read about in one of the books, many books that I read out. These days I can't remember the names and the titles because I think I was discussing with Brankeni the other time. My target is a book per week. So far I'm doing 1.6 books per month, but in the last few weeks I think I've been able to do 2-3 books per week. So I'm quickly beginning to not remember the the names, the authors, and focus more on the lesson of those books. So please bear with me. So in one of these books, there is this story of a man who found, he was sitting somewhere, and he found a foreign coin. Look next to where he was seated. He found this foreign coin. He couldn't figure out exactly where the coin, belonged. So he picked it up. He knew it's probably legal tender in another nation, but definitely not in his own nation. So he picked it up. And while he was looking at it, a man with a foreign accent walked by, saw him and said, "Hello, I'm going to the next country, north side of where you are, and I actually need that coin. Do you mind exchanging this coin with me for 2 silver coins?" And the man thought, "Oh, why not? I mean, the coin is useless to him. He found it in the dust next to the chair where he was seated. So he was happy to exchange it for 2 silver coins." And a few minutes later, there was a man that came and said, "Wow, I love silver coins. I'm actually collecting silver coins. Do you mind giving me those 2 silver coins for 2 gold coins?" So the man said, "Okay, I don't mind." So he gave the collector 2 silver coins, and in exchange he got 2 gold coins. And around that time, the same day, a man came around talking to him about how distressed he was. This man sells blankets. So he had a warehouse filled with blankets, but sales were bad. He was going to lose his home. He needed 2 gold coins. So he asked the man, "Look, I'm looking for 2 gold coins. If I'm able to get 2 gold coins, I'm ready to exchange these 2 gold coins for the warehouse of blankets that I have, because I'm not just getting anybody to buy blankets." So the man said, "Okay, I have 2 gold coins. I don't mind getting your warehouse filled with blankets." He gave him the 2 gold coins. And suddenly, this man became a proud owner of a blanket warehouse. Toward the end of the day, the king's horseman rode into the town and said, "LD, LD, greetings from the king. You all know we're at war with the next town, with the next country. And now the weather is cold. The soldiers are out of blankets. The king is in need of blankets for the soldiers. And the king is willing to give 2 bags of gold for this amount of blankets." It just so happened that the amount of blankets they were looking for was the amount of blanket that was in the warehouse that this man had just gotten. So the man said, I can help the king. Can I have those 2 bags of gold? And this is the key to the warehouse. You have all the blankets you want." And the day was quickly, getting to the end of the day. It was getting to the end of the day. The day was winding up. So he closed his workshop 2 bags of gold richer, and he started heading home. Unknown to him, there were 2 other guys that had been observing the man the whole day, and they've been watching how the man was receiving coins upon coins and then bags of gold, and they connived to rob him just at about a few distance towards the door of his house. His wife was already out to receive him, because the wife could see him coming from afar off, these robbers attacked him and they stole the 2 bags of gold from him. He was lucky, he was left alive and not seriously hurt. And the wife, who had seen him afar off, ran towards him and said, "What happened?" The man said, "Well, I was just robbed by those riffraffs." And she said, "What did you lose?" She looked at him and said, he looked at her and said, "I lost nothing." And this is the aim of my message today. If you consider the story carefully, what did that man lose? 2 bags of gold, some would say. Some would say 2 gold coins, 2 silver coins, a warehouse full of blankets. Or maybe he lost nothing. Why? Because there was none of those things that belonged to him anyway. At some point, he was a custodian of all of them. But in reality, he really never owned any of them. 1 Timothy chapter 6 from verse 6 to 9, reading the Amplified Version. It says, "But godliness actually is a source of great gain when accompanied by contentment. That contentment that comes from a sense of inner confidence based on the sufficiency of God. For we have brought nothing into this world." And that is clear. We cannot therefore take anything out of this world either. But if we have food and clothing, with these we will be content. But those who are not financially ethical and crave to get rich with a compulsive, greedy longing for wealth fall into temptation and a trap and into many foolish and harmful desires that plunge people into ruin and destruction, leading to personal misery. For we brought nothing into this world, and it is clear that we will take nothing out of this world. From the Genesis to the revelation of our lives, from the beginning to the end of our lives, at different times we will be custodians of many things. But make no mistakes, while they are yours, you really don't own any. You don't own any. It was given to you, and at some point, the giver of the gift will ask for the gift. And this is a recurring thing. If you study the Bible, you see it over and over and over again. It's a recurring thing. God gives, God takes. God gives, God takes. The more God gives you, the more God asks for you to give back. The more you give back to God, and then the more God will give to you. And the cycle goes on and on and on. Some of us, we get stuck in our blessings, and it's like, oh, we're not getting any bigger than we are. It's like we are now a form of a dead sea. We're just receiving, but we're no longer getting bigger. We are not like an oasis. We're not flowing. We're not a river. You keep wondering why. It's because at some point you stop giving back. You stop giving the gift back to the giver of the gift. Maybe perhaps you think now that you own those things, that they belong to you. And now all of a sudden you're guarding them and you're protecting them. And you're not giving back to the man, the God who gave it to you in the first instance. In Genesis chapter 22, Abraham found himself in this situation. I want us to read Genesis 22. If you can open to Genesis 22. It's a little bit of a read, but I think it's good that we all read it. If you have it, you have your phone, you can Google that as well. Genesis 22. Interesting. Now, I'll give you a little bit of a background to this story. So, Abraham was a nobody, unbeliever, a worshiper of gods, the hidden. And God, by grace, picked him up to become somebody. God took him from his nation, took him from his people, and sent him on a journey to a place of promise. And God said, listen to me, follow me, I'll bless you. And God spoke to Abraham. It was a personal revelation. And Abraham did what crazy people do, in inverted commas. People of faith, what they do. He did what is not commonsensical. He did what does not make sense. He decided to follow the voice of God, which was not conventional wisdom, which did not make sense. So Abraham followed God, followed the voice of God, left his family, left his people, and decided on a journey to follow God to where God said he was leading him. Now, God had promised Abraham that he would make nations of him. He was going to bless him. And Abraham waited for a long time. As a matter of fact, at the time Abraham finally got a child, it was a miracle that he could even have sex. He was 100 years old. And Sarah was almost 100 years old herself, way past menopause. So that they could even have sex, that she could be pregnant, was a miracle. But the promises of God are like this. If it were something that could be done by man, then it wouldn't be God. They're usually mind-blowing. They're usually, oh, how did that happen? And that was how Abraham and Sarah got Isaac. Now, Abraham is saying, finally, it is worthwhile serving God. It is worthwhile waiting for God. I waited for this long, and even though it took a long time, God did not disappoint me. Now, finally, I have that promised child. Finally, God is going to bless me. Now, finally, God is going to bless generations after me. And then, Genesis 22 happened. Genesis 22. God, sometime later, God tested Abraham. He said, Abraham, here I am. Abraham replied. Then God said, take your son, your only son, whom you love, Isaac, so that he doesn't think there's maybe an imaginary son, or maybe it was Ishmael. He said, your only son, whom you love, and go to the region of Moriah and sacrifice him there as a burnt offering on a mountain I will show you. Listen, now God is telling him, and he's specific. He said, I don't want the second best child. I want your favorite. I want that thing that you love the most. I want that thing that you need, that thing that you think without I cannot exist. Without my future is bleak. That is the one that I want. But not only did God tell him, I want Isaac, and I want you to sacrifice Isaac. He said he wanted him as a burnt offering. You know, it's one thing to sacrifice an animal or a human being. It's another thing to kill that human and then burn that human. He said, that is what I want. And I want it off the one thing that you love the most. That no mistakes about it. Now, to compound this, he said, go to the region of Moriah, sacrifice him there as a burnt offering on a mountain I will show you. Listen, when God tells you to do something, when God is asking of you a sacrifice, the vision is never 2020. It's always blah blah. I see men like trees like men. It's never clear. God is saying, I want you to sacrifice that thing that you want, that thing that you love, that thing that is dear to you. That is what I want from you. Now, let's back up a little bit. God gave it to him. I know now it looks like it is his own. But the truth is, Isaac never belonged to Abraham. Isaac is God's. God is only asking back what he gave to Abraham. And not only that, the instructions are not clear. It is one thing to give a sacrifice and give a very painful sacrifice. It is easier when the instructions are clear. Go to point B. Turn left, turn right, walk 100 meters. You will see a mark there with a bed there. Put the sacrifice there, sacrifice it, go home. It's another thing when he says, take that thing that you love. Take it to a point. When you get to that point, I will give you further instructions. It's never 2020. And I know there's somebody looking and watching me or listening to my voice this morning, and they say, I've done this, I've done that, but I don't really know where I'm going. I have a sense of what it is, but I'm not sure. It's just not clear. You are not alone. As a matter of fact, it should be like that. So what did Abraham do? Abraham gathered some men with him, and he took that sacrifice, that gift that is now his own, took him, and they started the journey to that region of Moriah that God spoke about. Still not sure which direction, but obedient, moving towards it. Listen, if God is laying something in your heart, if God is laying a sacrifice on your heart, it's not clear yet. You should start preparing towards that sacrifice. God needs something of you. It could be money. It's not always money. It could be your time. It could be your resources. It could be your duty. It could be anything. But something that will cost you. If God is already asking you, you are not sure of the time. You know what? Don't wait until you get the final. Start moving. Start making preparations. Start going towards the region of Moriah. Because if you do not go to the region of Moriah, God will not speak clearly as to what the next terms should be. Some of us are stuck where we are today because we never took that first step. We never made the preparations and the adjustments that we needed to make. Verse 3. Early the next morning, Abraham got up and loaded his donkey. He took with him 2 of his servants and his son Isaac. When he had cut enough wood for the burnt offering, he set out for the place God had told him about. On the 3rd day, Abraham looked up and saw the place in a distance. See, it took him 3 days. Think about it. 3 days of journeying on a donkey with the sacrifice. The sacrifice that he knows he's going to lose. The sacrifice that he loves dearly. Talking to the boy. Looking into the boy's eyes. The boy saying, "Oh, daddy." And with hope in his eyes. And he looking back at the boy. And talking to the boy as if nothing has happened. Yet knowing that he's moving in a direction that is going to terminate that boy's life. 3 days. And on the 3rd day, he looked up and he saw the place. When he got to the region of Moriah, it was only at that point that he saw the mountain where he was going to sacrifice Isaac. And I want to encourage you today to whatever it is God has asked you to do, that God is laying on your heart, is not clear, but you know God is demanding something of me. Start moving in that direction. If you don't move in that direction, as painful as it is, if you don't start planning to do that thing, you will never get to the next step. Region of Moriah, then 3 days, then you see the point. And then Abraham said to his servants, "Stay here with the donkey while I and the boy go over there. We will worship and then we will come back to you." Once you see the place of worship, it becomes a personal thing. Then you can't carry friends with you. You can't carry assistants with you. When Abraham moved to the region of Moriah and he saw the place of sacrifice, it now becomes a personal thing. This is where you do crazy stuff. But it's not new to Abraham. See, there was a time when God spoke to him and he listened to the voice of God and he left his family. He's not new to that kind of move. Abraham is a man of faith and he moved by faith. Now this is the second time. He's moving by faith again to do what ordinarily would be termed ridiculous. Dangerously ridiculous. But you see, he couldn't share that with anybody. Because imagine if he shared it with the people he took along with him. What do you think will happen? They will restrain Abraham. They will put handcuffs in him and say, "Let's take him to the hospital." Because this man is not well. Who sacrifices his son? His only son. For you to do the things that God has asked you to do, you have to block the voices of everybody out. And move on. Because then it becomes a personal thing. And as they were going, Isaac spoke up and said to his father, "Abraham, father." "Yes, my son," Abraham replied. "The fire, the wood, they are here. But where's the lamb for the burnt offering?" Abraham answered, "God himself, he will provide the lamb for the burnt offering, my son." And the two of them went on together. They kept going. And when they reached the place God had told him about, Abraham built an altar and there arranged the wood on it. He bound Isaac and laid him on the altar, on top of the wood. Then he reached out his hand and took the knife to slay his son. But the angel of the Lord called out from heaven, Abraham, Abraham. Here I am, he replied. Do not lay a hand on the boy. He said, do not do anything to him. Now I know that you fear God, because you have not withheld from him your son, your only son. Abraham looked up, and there in a thicket he saw a ram caught by his horns. He went over and took the ram and sacrificed it as a burnt offering instead of his son. So Abraham called that place, the Lord will provide. And to this day, on the mountain of the Lord will provide. It is said, on the mountain of the Lord it will be provided. Do you know, a lot of our blessings are tied to the ram's horn that is locked in the bush. A lot of our blessings, they are actually tied to the ram's horn that is locked to the bush. But you will never see that ram until you first sacrifice that thing that you love. When Abraham sacrificed the ram, in verse 15, in verse 16, the angel said, I swear by myself, this is God, declares the Lord, that because you have done this, and have not withheld your son, your only son, I will surely bless you. And I will make your descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky, and as the sand on the seashore. Your descendants will take possessions of the cities of their enemies. And through your offspring, all nations on the earth will be blessed, because you have obeyed me. These are extraordinary declarations from the Almighty. These are extraordinary blessings from God. But these are because of extraordinary moves by people of God. You want to be a testimony? You want your life to be a testimony? You must do things that Abraham did. You can't say, I'm a child of Abraham, and yet you do not do what Abraham, or you do not do the kind of things that Abraham did. Sometimes we wonder, how did Abraham do it? This is your son, your only begotten son, the son that you love. And you took that son and took him to the mountain, and you were about to slit his throat. But you know, Abraham knew God. Brothers and sisters, know your God. When you know your God, your life will be easy. I mean, you will have difficulties, you will have challenges, but your life will be easy. You know, Abraham knew God. Abraham did not believe Isaac was going to die. He obeyed God. He took Isaac. He took the wood, he took the knife. But Abraham actually believed that even if he killed Isaac that day, that God will raise Isaac from the dead. He believed because he knows God. And he knows that once God has said a thing, that he will back it up. In Hebrews 11, verse 17 to 19, when Paul was talking about the heroes of faith, it says, by faith, Abraham, when God tested him, offered Isaac as a sacrifice. He who had embraced the promises was about to sacrifice his one and only son. Even though God had said to him, it is through Isaac that your offering will be reckoned. Look, God had promised Abraham that I'm going to bless generations and generations and generations through Isaac. And yet, God said, sacrifice Isaac. And Abraham went ahead. Let's finish this. In verse 19. Abraham reasoned that God could raise the dead. And so, in a manner of speaking, he did receive Isaac back from the dead. Because inside of Abraham, Isaac was already sacrificed. It was a done deal. And because God knew that inside him, he had given that gift back to him, the giver, he was able to see the ram with his own locked in the bushes. The sacrifice happened here, right in his heart. Abraham saw Isaac dead and saw God resurrect him. That is why he was able to make the move. If you have not settled in your heart that you will do whatever God tells you to do, you cannot see the ram. It's even doubtful that you will make the trip to the mountain. Abraham was able to give the gift back to the giver because he figured out that if he had burnt Isaac that day, that God will still raise Isaac from the dead and he will still take Isaac back to the people that they left behind. You have been gifted with all your blessings. The giver of the gift has been asking you for some of the gift back. And what has your response been? And if you say, oh, but I haven't heard from God. Well, God is always speaking. He's always speaking. Acts 17, verse 27. God made the nations so they will seek him. Perhaps even reach out to him and find him. In fact, God isn't far away from any one of us. God is always speaking. The question is, are you hearing? Or have you guarded the gift that God gave you so much now that it's mine, everything is mine. It's my money, it's my time, it's my resources. I can't make it. How can the job that God gave you be the reason why you can't serve God? That's a problem. How can the money that God gave you be the reason why you can't serve God? There's something seriously wrong with that. How can anything that God gave you be the reason why you cannot sacrifice to God? It's easy to come to church when it's convenient. But can you come to God when sacrifice is required? Can you give back to God from what God has given you? And that's the question I want you to ask yourself today. Because if you don't pass this stage of sacrificial giving, you will not move to the next stage. You won't see it. Let us pray. Father in heaven, we thank you